So again, welcome to tonight's presentation, Off-Season Training for Triathletes, Maximize the Transition Between Seasons with David Glover and Krista Schultz. Just do a quick introduction. So I'm David, and I'd just like to introduce Krista real quickly. Krista is a graduate of University of New Orleans and Goucher College with degrees in exercise physiology and a master in athletic administration respectively. As a triathlete, she's been competing for more than a dozen years. She represented the state of Maryland in the Best of the U.S. competition from 2006 to 2008. She's in Eagleman at her first half Ironman. She qualified for Kona, and she also raced in the inaugural Ironman China, where she placed in her age group. Krista is a founder of She Does Try, which is programs for women with the goal to help women build more confidence through the sport of triathlon, and she's also a co-founder of School of Tri.
Thanks, David. I'm going to introduce David. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a former nuclear submariner. He's also a cancer survivor, and he's the author of a book titled Full-Time in Sub-9, How to Fit Iron Distance into Everyday Life. He's also the race director for the Luray Triathlon, the creator of School of Tri and Endurance Works, which put on these webinars, and he's finished 28 Ironmans, including Ironman Hawaii, and 2 sub-9-hour finishes with 5 overall wins. He was also inducted into the Vineman Hall of Fame in 2007.
So again, welcome, and we want to talk about the off-season, and this is a great quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "Adopt the pace of nature, your secret is patience." Our goal here is to get through the presentation in 30 to 40 minutes. We want to cover a couple different areas that we'll introduce. We're going to share examples as much as possible, as well as provide guidelines. But keep in mind that everyone's going to be a little bit different. So what may be a guideline for many people may not be for you. So just take everything we say with a grain of salt. And again, we're going to try and take as many questions at the end. Thank you for those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. We went through all of them. I think we should be able to address about 70 to 80% of them in the actual presentation. So how to approach the off season? So there's sort of two extremes. On the one extreme, it's be the bear and hibernate and do nothing. And the risk here is detraining. And essentially when your body and specifically your muscles, which provide movement, are very adaptable. So they adapt to the training that you do. So the different types of swimming, biking, running, strength, whatever you do. The risk here of doing nothing is that you're going to lose that adaptation. And after a period of 3 or 4 weeks, you actually start to lose some of that cardiovascular aerobic conditioning. Strength typically sticks around for 4 weeks or so. But there's definitely a downside to doing nothing, although it would be nice to sleep through the winter. The other extreme is to keep racing, and there's some of the risks associated with this as well. I listed a few of them: injury, burnout, staleness, and overtraining. And I use myself as a great example for this. And if I go back to 2007, was sort of a great year for me. I'd been doing the sport for about 13 or so years at that point in time, and started out the year doing the Goofy Challenge, the Disney Marathon and Half Marathon in January, and then had this aggressive schedule. I was working with a coach and ended up doing, long story short, up until that point I'd been doing like 1 to 2 Ironmans a year, which is a lot. Well, that year I was like, well, I'm going to do 3, and the first one went great. Went fastest time yet. Went like an 8:51 at Roth in Germany, and went on to win Vineman in July, and then August, that was the first year they did the Ironman Louisville, so I was like, all right, I got to do that one. So I did that one too, and you kind of were plot a trajectory of my time. They were going down. I mean, I was getting slower, and I had this illusion of, well, I could just keep this up. In 2008, I'm just going to keep getting better, and so I decided, okay, well, Disney worked for me in January. Why not do another marathon in February 2008? So I didn't really take an off season that year. I raced Louisville in August and then kind of kept training and was doing a lot of stuff. Didn't really take a break and started to ramp up my marathon training. Well, long story short is I basically wrecked my body for at least a year with adrenal fatigue, injured my hamstring, and just really burned myself out. So I pretty much lost a whole year of racing and pretty much couldn't run for much of that year as well. So there is downside to doing too little. There's also downside for doing too much. So we want to kind of talk about what's that happy medium. And we want to approach it from three perspectives. And the first perspective is looking back. So really to move forward to next year, we kind of have to look back at this year. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We want to look forward because we want to say, okay, what you want to do next year sort of drives what you do now. And then finally we'll talk about what you do now, which is sort of the meat of this presentation. So looking back.
So one of the things that I challenge a lot of my clients to do is when we think about goals and what are we going to do next year is to really look back at your past races from this year and learn from that by, evaluating those races. So did you have goals? And were you able to achieve those goals? And some of those goals may have been as simple as executing your race nutrition so you feel good during a race. And they could have been outcome goals. You might have wanted to finish in a particular time or qualify or make the podium or just finish. But, looking back, did you achieve them? And if you did, what worked? So did you execute that nutrition plan? Did you, train? Did you follow your training plan? Did you get to the pool and do all your swim workouts? Did you do your intervals on the track? What worked? And if you look back and you realize, okay, my bike split was really weak, my nutrition was great, but I didn't train as much on the bike, then that's something that didn't work well. So we try to determine what to do differently. And if the schedule was too challenging and you couldn't get it in due to work schedule, stress levels were too high, it's really important to sort of take a look at those specific things so you can be successful going forward. And I have an example from this past year. I went out and raced. This is a picture of me and a client of mine. I've got the black Sheeta's Tri visor on, and one of my clients that lives out in New York, we did an Olympic distance triathlon, and she used the event as a training race. And I was actually really proud of her because she finished the day very happy and said to me, I'm glad that I did as well as I did based on the training that I did. So she didn't have any expectations beyond what she knew she had trained for. So my experience was a little different. I had an expectation I was going to win this race. And I'm very competitive, as a lot of us are in the sport, and I go to a race that I think I can do really well. And one of the things I neglected to do this year, I was focusing on running a lot, is to get into training on the bike, doing enough volume, doing enough hill work, training when the weather's not so great. So it rained on race day, and my bike split was a few minutes slower than the top 3 finishers. So I ended up in the top 6 instead of, possibly being able to win this event, or at least getting in the top 3 if I had done a little extra work. So my expectations sort of exceeded what I put into this race. So looking back, I can tell, okay, I need to work on that biking and skills and climbing and getting out there when the weather's not so great.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about looking back, and before we get to now or today, we want to look forward. And it's a great quote. In the absence of clearly defined goals, we become strangely loyal to performing daily acts of trivia. So goals are important, and it sort of sets the stage for what you want to do next year, what you want to accomplish, and kind of by declaring that up front, it kind of becomes your endpoint, and then your job now is to kind of lay out these stepping stones to get to that endpoint. And if you've gone through that evaluation of this year, and maybe you're a new athlete and you just did a couple sprints and you want to make the jump up to international, or maybe you're an experienced athlete and you're making your jump up to Ironman, whatever it is, it helps to kind of sit down and write down, okay, what is it you want to do? And if you're doing something for the first time, maybe the goal is to finish. If you've been doing something for a period of time, maybe you want to place, or maybe you want to achieve a certain time. But write down what those races are. What time of year, location. What do you need to, the skills or techniques you need. For example, if you're a new triathlete and you've just done pool swims, and you're going to do an open water swim for the first year, so that's a great skill that you need to practice. If you live in an area where you don't have much hills, for example, and you're doing a hilly half Ironman, and you need to increase your leg strength and hill climbing ability, how are you going to do that? And what resources do you need to accomplish your goals? Is it a training plan? Is it a coach? Is it finding a more experienced athlete you can sit down with to help you? And you're really working backwards from your end goals. So as Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. And we're not going to spend too much time on this because we really want to talk about now. But we are doing a webinar coming up in early December that's going to talk specifically about planning your triathlon season and walking through examples of how you can do that, and kind of creating that master, that annual training plan. So this is the gut of the core of the presentation. And I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Godin, but he puts out a daily blog, and usually somehow related to marketing, but he touches on a lot of different things. And I really found this pretty profound. But most of the time, if you ask someone about their agenda, it turns out that involves doing what's on someone else's agenda. So one of the key things we want to talk about when we talk about your off season is that it's your off season, and it's really figuring out what you need to do to be successful or not do. So sometimes doing less is better, and we'll explain. So we're going to kind of break the off season into 3 phases. The first phase we're calling R&R, or rest and relaxation. The second we're going to call ease back into training, and then the third is your early season training. So that's sort of kicking off, what you're going to, your more formal triathlon training. So let's look at each one.
So what I challenge you to do during each of these phases, and even throughout the season, is to make a list of your priorities and to be in touch with what those are, because if your priority is changing with training and racing, it's good to have that written down, so when something comes up in your schedule where you have to figure out what you need to do, training versus maybe spending time with friends and family, that those priorities are clear to you, that this time period in particular, the R&R in the off season, when you finish your races and you're done and you're taking some downtime, you can spend a little less time training, more time doing things that don't involve training, more social things, more relaxation. So it's a time for your body to actually lose a little fitness. And although you may gain a little weight, we want to avoid gaining a lot of weight. In particular, we just want to take a break. So this usually lasts anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. It could be a little bit longer for some athletes, but typically I encourage my athletes to take about 4 weeks or so, and sort of just do what they want, but take a break and don't feel like you have to train and sleep longer, get more massages, do things that are very enjoyable, take trips, a good time to plan family vacations.
If you have a spouse or significant other, it's a great time to do those honeydew projects like painting the bedroom or replacing the blinds, whatever. The key here is really it's to recharge, both physically and mentally. So kind of get through that first phase, and we're calling this second phase, ease back into training, and it's sort of being more active. So you're not necessarily doing swimming, biking, and running. You might want to use this time to work on other things. It's a great time to incorporate strength training. I'm a big fan of yoga, and I like doing the Bikram yoga, so I start working that into my schedule so I don't have to swim, bike, and run all the time, so I can start doing other stuff, so work on flexibility, work on core strength. I like to call it, I feel like training. I feel like doing this. I feel like, we live in Boulder, Colorado now, so we have pretty easy access to the ski mountains, so it's a good time. Hey, I'm just gonna go skiing today, or they're grooming the North Boulder Park. We got some snow in town. I'll go throw on my skis and cross country ski for an hour or so. It's sort of that time of, okay, I'm active, I'm hiking, but if I look at Tuesday, for example, maybe normally my normal schedule might be Pilates and swimming. Well, I don't feel like swimming today, so I'm just gonna cross that off the list. One thing to be careful of is, in terms of time of year, I mean, this is probably November, December, maybe a little bit into January. Just be careful of those hard group rides and master's classes.
Yeah, so this phase, I like to start incorporating some basic strength training for some of my athletes, and it's a good time to start an adaptation phase of strength. We have a strength training plan on our website, which basically you go through the full body and do some light strengthening. So you're introducing strength training to your program in a way that you're preparing your body for a phase that you can lift more weight in the long run to help your power. So here it's just establishing some kind of base and getting in the gym maybe a few times a week and starting that. There's a picture of David's got a training log here. I like to encourage people to start logging. You don't have to be perfect. Again, it's just sort of incorporating stuff back into your program and starting to get in the routine of writing things down. I like to use Training Peaks. It's pretty simple. There's other things out there too. You can use a Google Calendar. You can use Excel. But, start getting in the habit of doing that. And again, you may want to reassess priorities here, but keep in mind you're just easing back into things again, and training's not as much of a priority yet. This phase can last about 4 to 8 weeks. Like David said, it may be through October, November, just depending on when you're, when you're going to start racing, when you ended your season.
Okay, and we're going to call the last period during your off season, sort of the early season training, and this is really where you want to start to bring up your fitness level. So the time of year, if you're, again, you kind of have to work backwards from when you're racing. If you're starting to race, most, depending on where you live, a lot of places, start April, May time frames. So your early season training, might typically start, for a lot of athletes, it starts right after the new year, so you kind of January time frame. It's when you want to start to shift to the more of the swimming, the biking, and running. There's the principle of specificity in exercise physiology, which basically states that your body and your muscles adapt to the demands placed on them. So if you want to be a better swimmer, biker, and runner, you have to swim, bike, and run. So this is where, if you're doing the cross-country skiing, it's great for, the winter, but at some point you're going to have to shift over, to biking and running to get better at biking and running. So Chris had already talked about introducing strength maybe a little bit earlier, but you also want to, at this point, start adding in some intervals. And, we're going to talk a little bit about both these in a second. It's also a good time. This is an example. Krista's actually doing a blood lactate test on me, so it's basically she's pricking my finger as I'm riding in an indoor stationary bike at increasing levels of intensity to measure the amount of lactate in my blood to try and determine my lactate threshold. This is this time of year you can start doing some baseline tests. So when we, as coaches, when we build training programs or coach athletes, we'll start having them do some tests, depending on the athlete. So, a great example, if you've been running through the winter, a great baseline test is to go out and run a 5K or a 10K and get that time and kind of see where you're at. For a bike, it might be doing a 30-minute test on an indoor bike. For a swim, it might be depending on your swimming ability, swimming a 400, maybe even up to 1,000, just to see what you can do. This period is typically a couple months, and then you kind of jump more into the what we would call the in-season triathlon training. So we got a few questions about this. How to get faster in the off season, and there's a lot of different thoughts around this, and the two things we want to talk about are strength training and intervals and drills.
So the last phase we talked about before you really get into the meat of your training, you're just starting to rebuild your base. We said to build your strength, and that may mean increasing the amount of weight you're doing with certain lifts, and maybe doing more progressive exercises. So strength training is very important to not only prevent injuries, and there were quite a few questions about injuries and overtraining. So if you want to basically boost your hormone production, your testosterone production, strength training is a good way to keep those hormones in balance, because endurance training actually can lower that testosterone. So strength training not only makes you feel better from a fatigue standpoint, but also helps to improve, we listed here, muscle function, strength, and power, which translates to not only more power in general, but just more cycling power, running, and swimming. So doing exercises that incorporate the entire body, and also, again, building the phase where you're lifting more weight, and also, trying to challenge yourself and actually do movements that are progressive, such as, maybe a squat to, sort of a split squat, so body weight squat building up to more of a one-leg exercise to strengthen the weaker side. And you want to think about, because we talked about changing your body composition in the off season, and how if you're doing less activity, it's easier to, decrease that body fat. So it's a good opportunity to take a look at how many calories you're taking in. And I like to start with doing a food log for people that want to lose body fat, so they're not decreasing their calories so much they don't have enough energy for the day or to work out. And a lot of professional coaches do this with their athletes, so professional track and field runners, other endurance athletes, they just take a look at, first of all, how many calories are they taking in. And then one of the ways I determine that, I use an online equation to, it's called the Cunningham equation, and you can basically determine your resting metabolic rate based off your body weight and if you can get your body fat percentage. So if you have those numbers, you can plug it into a website, and I actually have the link on my blog. So it's just KristaSchultz.com, and you can also search the Cunningham equation and basically plug that in and figure out, okay, here's a starting point. And then again, what are my energy needs? How do I feel in this amount of calories? Am I losing weight? Am I getting enough protein? So if you're getting about a gram per pound of body weight, that could be more, maybe as much as you need, maybe not, but sort of determining your needs based off of trial and error. And then we start getting into intervals and drills. You don't have to go crazy with this. Again, you're just getting into, sort of structured training after your 3 phases of your off season. So this might be sometime in January, February. And we have a set of drills on our website. We use pre-stretching drills called dynamic stretches and just running drills to help improve your muscle firing ability. Also, just increasing the intensity. I like to use 30, 60, 90, and 2-minute, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2-minute intervals, and sort of build that into training plans. So you're not doing super intense sessions. We're incorporating these short efforts at a moderate to a moderately hard effort with a lot of recovery, and maybe doing drills, pre-stretching, and learning to sustain harder efforts, but essentially increase your threshold for certain metabolic demands depending on what your distance you're training for, and your technique. The faster you can move more efficiently by doing intervals and drills, the more economical your body is. And it also makes things less boring in general.
So we'll give you some examples of some intervals and drills. So this is from example interval set within a workout. So this is not a complete workout, but this is something you could do within a workout. So for example, at the end of a workout, and you can actually do this year round. So it's okay to do a little bit of intensity year round, and in fact it's probably a good thing. So just to give you an example of how an interval set might progress from week to week or workout to workout. So in week 1, I'm doing a 4x50 free. I'm doing the first 35 fast. So basically, if I'm in a 25-meter pool, I'm swimming down, 1 length fast, and then, kicking off the wall a little bit fast, and then the last, 15 meters, yards, easy. We're asked to do that again. And then, 6x25, kick fast. If I go to the next week, for the first one, I've gone from 450s to 550s and from 6 to 8 kicks. Go to the next week, now I've gone up to a 75. So I'm kind of changing it up a little bit. I can either play around with the duration of the interval. So in this case, I've gone from 50 to 75. I can play around with the frequency, so the number of times, and I can also play around with the rest interval. So it's just a way to mix it up, and again, the goal here is to get the muscles firing faster, and you're also getting your aerobic system to work at a higher level as well. So running is a real simple example. So Krista mentioned if you go to probably the easiest place to find them, if you go to enduranceworks.net, is our training plan website, but under resources, we have a bunch of videos on warm-up and cool-down, including the dynamic stretches. So they're a way to dynamically, so move through movement, warm up your lower body. So the example of run intervals, you can as prior to running, you can do the dynamic stretches, and then as you warm up, you could also include some short interval strides, or basically quick acceleration. So you're going fast, but it's not an all-out sprint, but just to get your leg muscle fibers to fire faster. And here's an example of a interval set within a workout. So if you have access to a short hill, you can do this easily. So it's basically going up to a hill. You're going up a tempo, so we're going to call that a moderately hard effort. So we're not sprinting up the hill, but just going up a moderately hard effort. And again, I can kind of vary in this case, from varying the frequency, like 4, 6, or 8, or the duration, so 45 seconds up to a minute. As in this case, we're actually varying the rest interval as well, depending on how far we're going up. If we go up further, we get more rest coming down. So just a way to kind of change it up each week and then progress from week to week.
Yeah, and also included in the resources under dynamic stretches are also drills. And there was a question about improving your running. Someone asked how to make it easier. They always struggle with the run, being a Clydesdale, and just feeling like it's always hard work. So doing the dynamic stretches, but also the drills that we have listed, in addition to the intervals, the drills basically teach the body to become more efficient with each step. So it's a neuromuscular adaptation that becomes subconscious as you move. And with each step, you become more efficient no matter what your weight. So, doing those drills and these intervals uphill will teach your body to do things sort of on, just cruise, and it won't feel as laborsome.
Plus at the end of the day, it gives you some variety. So you're not just going out and just doing the same old steady run or swim or bike. So it's a way to kind of make it more interesting. And voila, you've made it through the off season. So for next year, whether your goal is to get on the podium or just get the finisher's medal, it's really the things you do now. So some of the things we talked about, you can really set yourself up for success next year. And as I mentioned, sometimes you want to kind of stay away from the two extremes of doing too little, as well as the extreme of doing too much.
And I just wanted to add, there were quite a few questions about taking the time to work on one of the sports that's your weakest sport in the off season. And there is a good opportunity, in that phase where you start training again, sort of after the off season, maybe January, February, to just focus on, let's say swimming's your weakest event. I recommend increasing the frequency of swim. So if you normally swim 2 times a week, I would go, 3 times a week, and maybe an extra session with the coach, but cut down on the volume, and then keep your biking and your running in there as well as your strength, but just cut down on the number of days, maybe for about a month, so you can focus on improving your technique in the water and just getting more frequency, lower volume for that weaker sport. Same thing holds true for cycling, running, and I typically encourage people to do about 3 times a week of strength training, or what I've been doing with a lot of athletes that can't get in about an hour of strength, we just go 4 or 5 times a week and do 15, to 30-minute sessions where we pick some key exercises to focus on. So some of those might be injury prevention if you're injured, but again, you want to be consistent with what you're doing. That's how you make improvements. So the strength training helps everything overall. And I have plenty of research on especially cycling power. And they use the squat. The back squat is a good example. So typically those research studies are about 8 weeks long, and they take, about four reps of 4 sets of a squat where you're using about, and I call it a 4-rep max, where the most amount of weight you can lift 4 times. But we talked about building that strength up early on in the off season, and then getting to where you can lift a little heavier and incorporating, stuff like the squat. So, really focus on things you need to work on more so in the off season than your strength.
Okay, so that concludes the formal presentation.